Ridley Scott's 1979 Alien was a game changer, not just for genre filmmaking but for cinema in general. It took a concept that we were all familiar with, that of a contained suspense thriller, and turned it on its head by setting it within the context of a science fiction world. With just one film under his belt, Alien was Ridley Scott's only second feature film, but despite this, it is extremely well accomplished, both technically and stylistically. What Alien did that was so remarkable is that it took its time to introduce us to the characters and fully immerse us into the world of the film, and it takes a while before any action goes down. Its deliberate slow pace is what makes Alien work so well, and it is what sets it apart from the large majority of other big franchise movies. What makes Alien so great is that it's not an action movie. It's a suspense thriller that gradually becomes more and more of a monster movie as it progresses. All in all, Alien is an extremely unique motion picture that, although deals with many well-worn genre elements, does so in a way that sets it apart from conventional genre movies. It's not the elements themselves, but rather the execution of those elements that gives Alien its originality. So here we are, guys, part 1 of my Ridley Scott series, and first of all we're going to be talking about, of course, the classic, the original 1979's Alien. If you've been watching my videos lately, you'll know that I just recently saw Alien again, not that long ago, in the cinema actually, and although I've seen Alien before many times, I've got it on Blu-ray, but this is the first time I've actually ever seen Alien on the big screen. And before I get into my kind of discussion and analysis of the film, I first have to say that Alien on the big screen is so great. I would definitely recommend seeing it in the cinema if you ever get the chance to, because like Blade Runner, another one of my favourite Ridley Scott science fiction films, it works just as well on a massive big screen today in a big cinema. It doesn't feel like you're watching a film from 30, 40 years ago. It feels like this is like a modern science fiction film. And I think one of the reasons you can tell Alien is such a great film is that 40 years later you can go and watch it in the cinema on a massive big screen surround sound, and it still holds up. It hasn't aged at all. If you didn't know, going into this film, you wouldn't know it was made 40 years ago because it still holds up. As I said, it hasn't aged a day, and it was just so great watching it on the big screen for the very first time. And now let's just get straight into this now with my deconstructive kind of analysis and just discussion of the classic 1979 film Alien. And let's just start right from the get-go here. We have, of course, the opening credits appear in front of a large planet with rings, and we cut to the far reaches of deep space. The Nostromo, a commercial towering space vehicle carrying a refinery of 20 million tons of mineral ore, is en route to Earth with a crew of 7 inside. And inside the ship appears eerily quiet, but suddenly the onboard computer is activated, lights inside the ship are activated, and a room with 7 biobeds is illuminated. What really strikes me with this film from just the opening alone is, of course, I have to mention right off the bat here is Jerry Goldsmith's score. And what's interesting is this isn't something that I initially picked up on like the first time I saw the film, but every time I rewatch it, the score really stands out to me because it's really quite kind of different score. It's not like a big action movie score. It's not some big operatic kind of over the top orchestral score like something that Prometheus has. What really struck me watching Prometheus and Alien back to back actually is that Prometheus is very, and I really like Prometheus, but the difference, I think, the real big difference is that Prometheus is a very kind of big and over the top and in your face. It's really loud. It's not at all subtle in any way, but with Alien it's the complete opposite in that it's much quieter and it's much more understated. It's much more nuanced in a way, and the score really reflects this as well because it's not a big over the top loud, shouty, in your face score. The music is very kind of subtle, but it's very atmospheric. It really adds the tone and the feel of the film. And going into my next point here is just the atmosphere. It's so atmospheric, this film, regardless of what you think about it, whether you love Alien or not. And it's not one of my personal favourite films of all time. I do really like the film. I do think it's really great. But as I said, what is so great about this film is the kind of the atmosphere that it sets up and establishes, and how atmospheric it is, and the whole kind of suspense thriller feel of the film. And that is something that I really like because it is essentially a horror movie as well, but I really see it as a kind of full-on suspense thriller, and that's what I really like about this film. because it's not like a generic horror movie, obviously, because it's got the sci-fi elements, but as well as that, it's got these kind of suspense elements in there, and it's almost kind of Hitchcockian in a way, in a certain respect, and also kind of the use of silence in this film, and how kind of it's very suspenseful in its quietness. And again, from this opening scene alone, what really strikes you is how quiet the film is, and how kind of unnervingly quiet it is. And that's something that's set up and established from the very opening scene, and it's very unnerving because we really don't know how to feel, because it's so quiet and it's so kind of eerily quiet. We get a lot of this throughout the film. There's these eerie kind of silences, and we don't really know how to feel or how to react. So then when something does suddenly happen or jump out of the darkness, it's even more frightening, because the suspense is really kind of ratcheted up because of these kind of silences that are incorporated throughout the film. That's what makes it so great, because I'm not the biggest fan of horror films per se, but what I think Alien does that's so great is it is quieter, it is more nuanced, and it's smart as well, and it doesn't do things that's predictable. Like, you know, a lot of just cliche generic horror movies have the kind of stereotypical jump scares, and there are jump scares in this film, but they're incredibly well done jump scares, to the point where even though I've seen this film already, watching it again in the cinema, I still jumped at particular moments even though I knew they were coming. And I think that's a sign of a real great jump scares, when even though you know it's coming, it still makes you jump because it's so effectively done. And also another big point that jumps out to me from just the kind of opening alone is the slow pacing, and I mean that in a good way. A lot of the time I don't like it when films are kind of slow paced, and this isn't a really slow film. It doesn't feel really long when you're watching it, but what I mean by the kind of the slow pacing is that it doesn't feel rushed. It's not a real kind of fast, frantic, fast-paced film. And again, it's another way kind of contrast to Prometheus, because again, Prometheus, it's a very fast-paced film. It's constantly moving. It's moving at a blistering pace, and it's similar to Alien in that it's only set in kind of one location really. But with Prometheus, it's like things are constantly happening. It's constantly moving. It doesn't really slow down enough for things to sink in. But with Alien, it's a lot slower, and I really like that because, like I said, it adds that suspense thriller feel, but it also allows you kind of to gives you time to kind of let these things kind of sink in, and it just really adds to the overall kind of feeling of the film, the fact that it is kind of very slow and eerie and quiet and suspenseful. And I think that those things just really strike me from the very get-go of this film. And then of course, after the opening scene, they all congregate in the mess hall where they cheerfully enjoy a meal. And what really strikes me with this scene in particular is of course the characters and the dialogue between the characters, because even though I do like Prometheus, I think one of the things that Prometheus falls down on is that the characters aren't all kind of fully kind of fleshed out and well realised and, you know, convincing. A lot of the kind of the performances and the characters in Prometheus do feel a little scripted, do feel a little kind of artificial, if you will. But in Alien, all the characters in the original Alien film feel so real. They feel like real people. And one of the things this film does so well is that it takes its time to kind of introduce us to these characters, as I said at the beginning. It doesn't just rush into it. We get a chance to kind of sit with these characters at the kind of dinner table and just get to listen to them talk and interact with one another. And I think that's really great that the film takes the time to have scenes like this where we get to kind of learn about these characters and learn about who these characters are and what they're like and how they interact with one another. And it really just sets up the crew and kind of these people that we're going to be going on this journey with, and also the dialogue as well, because, you know, even though you know you're watching a film and they're not real people and they're reading from a script, you never once think that. It always feels like you're watching real people interacting with one another. I think that's one of the biggest praises I can give this film. And talking about characters, we have to talk about Ian Holm as Ash. I think this is just a really incredible performance. I'm a big fan of Ian Holm. Obviously, he's Bilbo Baggins in The Lord of the Rings, and he's really great in this film because it's a really kind of again, a kind of nuanced, understated performance, because obviously he's something like Prometheus, and I love Michael Fassbender in that film. I think he really steals the show, and I think he's the best thing in that film as the android David. But what Alien does is that they don't let you know that he's an android from the get-go. They kind of keep that secret and keep that hidden, and you think, oh, how are they going to pull that off? Because it's going to be a bit obvious, isn't it? And at the same time, if they try to trick us into thinking it's a real person, we're not going to believe it when it's revealed he's an android. But the way they do it in this film is so incredible. They do it in a way where if you don't know he's an android, like on the first time watch, you would just think he's a real guy. But at the same time, if you've already seen it and you know he's an android, there's these little things that he says and does along the way that are kind of little hints to the fact that he's not, a real person, that he is a robot. And I think the film is so incredible in that respect, because it doesn't, dumb it down for the audience. It doesn't try to trick you either, so if you haven't seen the film, you could be convinced he is a real person, but then if you have already seen the film and you know the outcome, you can pick up on these little hints along the way that he is actually a robot. And I think the film does a real great job with that. And of course, Ian Holm's performance, I think, is really great. Like I said, it is more understated. It's not some big, over-the-top kind of thing where it's like, oh, I am a robot. You can be tricked into thinking he's a person, but at the same time, there's these little things there where there's these little clues and indicators to the fact that maybe he is a robot. And I think it's just so incredibly well done. And of course, the whole ensemble cast. And what I think is really great is that what struck me kind of watching it back again the other day is that there is no single lead to begin with. We don't really know. Obviously, we know now, looking back on the entire franchise, we know Ripley is the lead character. But if you didn't know about the franchise or any of the other films, and it was the first time you saw Alien, you wouldn't know who the main character was, because at first it is an ensemble cast and there is no clear defined lead character. And it's not until as the film progresses when you gradually begin to realise, when Ripley starts coming to the forefront more, and you're like, oh, kind of she's coming forward as the main character now. And then obviously, she's the only one that survives at the end of the film. So as the film progresses, we then gradually realise, as she starts coming to the forefront, that okay, Ripley is the lead character now, and she is the one that's going to kind of take the reins as kind of the lead character in this film. But I think what is so great is that at the beginning we don't really know, and I think again it's a little thing that a lot of people might overlook, but I think again it's another thing that's so great about this film, because as I said, like a lot of other kind of cliche horror movies, you know who the lead is, you know who's going to die, you know who's going to live, and there's no sense of stakes or peril there, because you just know the main character from the beginning, and you know they're not going to die, and you know these people are going to die and they're toast. But with Alien, you don't really know who the single lead character is at the beginning of the film, and you don't really know on the first time watch who's going to live, who's going to die. And that's what makes it more thrilling and more kind of interesting and exciting to watch, because you don't know who's going to die, who's going to live. You don't know who's going to come to the forefront as the main character. And I think in that respect it is a lot like real life. It doesn't feel like you're watching a film. It feels like you're watching kind of a real situation. Like if this was to really happen, this is probably along the lines of how it would actually go down. There's not going to be a single clear lead character at the beginning, and you're not going to know. It's not going to be obvious who's going to live and who's going to die. And I think it's so great in that respect. And also, before I go any further, I have to mention that this review is for the director's cut. The director's cut is the version that I saw in the cinema, and it was also the first time I've seen the director's cut. Before this, I've only ever seen the theatrical release. And we also get a scene in this director's cut. The first new scene is the crew assembles in the cockpit to listen to the signal that they receive. And I didn't realise that this was an additional scene, but apparently it is. And I think it's a good addition, because we get them kind of intercepting the signal and listening to what it is. We just get a little bit more context there of what this signal is they received and what it sounds like and where it's coming from, which I think, it makes sense that they would have added that in there. And then going to the kind of planet now where the Nostromo lands, and what really strikes me about this part of the film is the scenery, of course, the locations. I think it's just so striking from a visual standpoint, and also this is where the tone of the film starts to kind of creep in, where it feels a lot more kind of grounded and realistic. Like, again, another big difference between this and Prometheus. Prometheus, it feels a lot kind of grander, a lot more kind of operatic, and on much of a bigger kind of godly scale, if you will. Whereas with Alien, we're back on a similar kind of planet with a similar kind of engineer ship there, but it's from a very different kind of perspective. We're kind of on the ground with these kind of astronauts as they're looking up on the ship. We're seeing it from a very different perspective. It's not kind of big and grand and operatic up high in the sky looking down on this. We're down on the ground in the dirt with these guys seeing this ship up there, and it's almost kind of like a Rogue One feel to it in a way. And what I mean by that is like kind of like Star Wars, it's kind of like all up in the air from the Jedi's perspective, whereas Rogue One, it's kind of a lot more kind of down on the ground from the Rebels perspective. And it's a similar kind of thing with Prometheus and Alien, actually, in that Prometheus, it's all kind of up from the kind of the gods and the engineers and all this, and then Alien, it's really kind of down to earth with these kind of just regular guys on the ground. And yeah, I absolutely love this scene where they kind of land on LV-426 and discover the engineer's ship, and it is so kind of just eerie and striking, and it's so stylistic as well. That's what I love about this film. It's not just a simple, bland, boring film. You know, it takes this kind of what could be considered just a generic concept and really kind of spins it on its head, and you know, presenting this really kind of just this strikingly kind of stylistic kind of sci-fi world with this kind of this ship there, and just the whole kind of tone and feel of it, and I just absolutely love it. And of course, when they enter the engineer's ship, and just the whole aesthetics of the film, it's just so dark and stylistic. And of course, I have to mention H.R. Geiger, who designed a lot of the things in this film, most notably the Alien, but also a lot of the sets, I believe, as well. Of course, we've got the incredible set design, this amazing set piece of the kind of the console there with the kind of engineer in the kind of the pilot seat, if you will, and it's just an incredible set that they're able to kind of do this back in the late 70s, and it looks just as good as Prometheus, if not better. You don't for one second think, oh, this isn't real, this is just a set. It honestly, it feels like they're in this big kind of alien ship. It all just looks so incredible and so authentic and so just scarily real. And like I said, all the set design there from H.R. Geiger are just so incredible and unique and really stand out and catch your attention. And of course, I have to mention John Hurt as Kane, the late John Hurt, of course. I still can't believe that he's not long passed away. He was 77, so not young, but still not that old either. Obviously, this was one of his most kind of iconic and memorable performances as Kane in Alien. And what's so great is that he doesn't really have that much to do, but he's so great in that role, and he plays a real kind of pivotal, important part in the film, and he really sells it. A great actor, and not much else to say there, but he does a really great job in this film as Kane. Of course, it is him who first discovers the kind of eggs there and the face hugger, obviously, which then attaches itself to his face, and it's a great moment here. This is when it starts to become more of a horror film, and we see that the face hugger just launch out of the egg. And you could criticize it, but it's doing the cliche horror thing, like, why are you going so close to this thing? But I would argue that obviously with something like Prometheus, it's like a snake, so it's clearly dangerous. Why would he go near that? With this, it doesn't look particularly dangerous. It just looks like some natural kind of organism kind of thing, this kind of egg. It doesn't look like there's some kind of evil creature there, so it makes sense that he's kind of curious and he's kind of looking at it. And then obviously the kind of face hugger kind of launches out of it and attaches itself to his face, and a great cut there. I mean, cut away, a great kind of horror movie moment there, where it just suddenly cuts as it kind of launches and attaches itself to his face. And again, I think all the horror elements are really great in this film, because I'm not a particularly big fan of horror, but if you to call Alien a horror film, then this is probably one of my favourite, if not my favourite horror film. I just think all the horror elements are handled so well, and it's not just about the horror elements. It's so much more than just kind of a horror. That it's a real great film with real great tension, suspense, thrills, characters. It's got so much to it, and then the horror elements are just kind of like icing on the cake. We've got some kind of horror elements that are kind of sprinkled in there. It's not about the horror elements, and that's kind of the biggest praise I could give this. And it's what I dislike about most other horror films, is that it's all about the horror. The horror elements are kind of the stars of the show, and everything else is kind of secondary to that. With Alien, it's the other way around. They kind of it has great characters, a great story, it's a great kind of suspense thriller, but it also has some horror elements sprinkled in there that just enhances it even more so. So that's what I think is so great about this as far as the horror is concerned. And then, of course, I have to mention Sigourney Weaver as Ripley, the iconic lead character in the entire Alien franchise. And what I love so much about the character of Ripley in this film is that she's such a strong well-written female character. And what I mean by that is that she's not necessarily kind of a physical badass or anything. She's such a strong character because of how well-written she is. The characterization of Ripley in this film is really great. As far as her actions and her character choices are concerned, she's got such clear convictions, and every time she makes a choice, she's never hesitant, she never has any doubt. She's always making strong character choices that defines who she is as a person. You know, she's never kind of hesitant about what she wants to do. She's constantly making these strong character choices, and her actions always reflect her strength of the character. I think that's what's so great about the character of Ripley in this film. And then, of course, when John Hurt is brought back onto the ship, Ripley is the only one who's like, no, he's not coming on board. And I love this because you can see it's a bit cold and emotionless, and it is in a way, but at the same time it's so kind of logical and sensible. And right away it's set up and established to us that Ripley is one of the real only characters who's making kind of strong, sensible, logical, you know, straightforward thinking, level-headed decisions in this film. And the fact that she doesn't want to bring John Hurt back on board, I think, is a massive contribution to this, because it's not as if she doesn't care for him, but she doesn't want to risk the lives of everyone else on this ship. She doesn't want to get the ship to get infected. And it's such a great character choice, because obviously in hindsight you look back on the film and you're like, she was right. If they hadn't brought him on board, the alien wouldn't have birthed, it wouldn't have escaped onto the ship, it wouldn't have killed everyone. So if they listened to her at the beginning of the film, they could have saved everyone's lives, except for kind of Kane's life, but then he ended up dying anyway, so, you know. But of course they all go against Ripley because she's not kind of the highest ranking officer, although actually she is, and Ash actually goes against her because obviously, as we find out later, he's got some ulterior motives there. But I think it's such a great moment here where she's like, no, I'm not bringing him back on board. And again, it's another thing that makes this probably one of my favourite horror films, is that from the get-go, Ripley is making sensible, logical, kind of level-headed decisions, and she's not letting her emotions get in the way. But then, of course, we wouldn't have a movie, so he does end up getting brought on board, and we see the kind of the face hugger properly for the first time, and it's an incredible design of this creature. The practical effects in this film are really great, because obviously it was made in the late 70s, you know, we didn't have all the CGI in that. There was a lot of modicals, there was a lot of kind of puppets, if you will, and kind of practical effects, but they all look so real and so convincing. There's not one practical effect in this film, apart from maybe one right at the very end of the film. There's a little moment there, but there's not one kind of a puppet or prop or practical effect in this film that stands out as looking kind of fake or artificial. Everything looks so real and so convincing, and you're able to buy into the film even more so. And I think CGI is great when it's done well, but I kind of maybe prefer practical effects, because what's so great about practical effects is that you can tell it's a real thing that is actually kind of really there, that you can touch and see. And even when CGI is really great, you can always tell, okay, that's obviously CGI. But when it's practical, even though you still know, you know, aliens aren't real and it's obviously not a real creature, when it's practical, it kind of increases the believability of it even more so, because it looks like it's a real thing that's really there, because it is really there. And I think the practical effects of the creatures, you know, particularly the facehugger, is really great. And then also shortly after this, when we get kind of the kind of uneasy relationship between Ash and Ripley kind of bubbles to the surface, if you will. They kind of have this kind of uneasy kind of relationship that kind of simmers throughout the film, where, and of course Ripley doesn't know at first that Ash is a robot until it's revealed to her at the end. And I think the back and forth between these two characters is really great, because, as I said, Ripley doesn't know Ash is a robot, and there's some kind of uneasiness there between the two of them, and it comes to a head at the end of the film. And the back and forth between those two characters, I think, is really great, and the performances, of course, by Ian Holm and Sigourney Weaver is what really sells it to us. And then, of course, we get the moment where the facehugger comes loose, and again, another great kind of subversion. We think it's going one way, and then suddenly it's not on him anymore. And what I love about this scene that comes shortly after is kind of the Hitchcockian tension to it, and how it's just uncomfortably suspenseful. Like when they're trying to track down to see where the facehugger went, where is it, we need to find it. And it's just so great, because like I said, it's almost like a scene from a Hitchcock film or something. It's just so suspenseful, because it's so quiet and we just don't know what's going to happen. And there's not kind of like big loud music or anything, you know, it's quiet, and it's so kind of uncomfortable to watch, because it is so kind of suspenseful. And again, it's what makes this film a real great suspense thriller, I think. Obviously there's horror elements in there, but it is a real great suspense thriller, I feel, first and foremost. And of course, it's from this point on that the film kind of becomes more contained and confined to just one isolated location, and it starts to shift from a straight up suspense thriller and gradually becomes more and more of a monster movie. Of course, this is when the kind of ship takes off, they just had to leave, and then from this point on, the entire film is just on the ship, the Nostromo, which, by the way, I love the design of the ship, and I think all the kind of model work and the exterior shots of the ship still holds up. It still looks really great, and yeah, I think the look of the ship is really cool and different, and I think it was really well done, really well filmed there by Ridley Scott. But yeah, this is where the film becomes less of a kind of just straight up suspense thriller, and it becomes more and more of a monster movie as it progresses. Of course, the big moment when it does become a monster movie is the iconic chestburster scene where the alien kind of burst out of John Hurt's chest, and of course one of the most iconic scenes in cinematic history. And what's so great about this scene is that kind of from what I know, a lot of the kind of actors involved didn't know how kind of bloody and over the top it was going to be, so a lot of their reactions are kind of their real reactions, especially kind of Veronica Cartwright. You can tell like her reaction seems so genuine, and apparently it is, because they didn't know it was going to be so bloody, and obviously she gets covered with a load of blood and she's like horrified, and it seems so genuine because apparently it is. They didn't know it was going to be that extreme and over the top, and it is such a great scene because obviously there would have been a lot of kind of puppet work and practical effects, but it looks real. Like nothing about it looks fake. The way it's shot, the whole kind of the execution of the scene is just so well done, and rightly so one of the kind of iconic, most iconic scenes in cinema history. And of course, this is when we first see the alien for the first time, which it kind of is birthed from John Hurt. And as I said, this is the point where I think this film switches into becoming more of a monster movie. From this point on, then it's about kind of tracking down, getting this monster, killing this monster, but of course it becomes the other way around, where it's the monster tracking them down, hunting them down, and taking them out. And even though you could say, oh well, it's just a bit of a kind of straightforward monster movie, I don't think it is, because even though it is just kind of an alien on a ship, and that's pretty much the entire film now to the end, to right at the end, everything is so well done. There's nothing that kind of sucks you out of the film, and it is so cool and different because it's not straightforward. It's not just some boring generic cliche thing you've seen before. It is on a spaceship. It is with an alien, so it's not just some generic kind of horror movie in a haunted house or something. It's in a spaceship. We're in deep space. We've got this kind of incredible, monstrous predator of an alien, which I'll talk about in a minute, just hunting them down. And it's such a testament to the film that even though, on paper it's literally just an alien hunting these guys down on a ship, it's so well done. It never gets boring, and you're constantly invested and engaged for every second of every scene from the very beginning to the very end of the film. And I think that's such a credit to kind of just the filmmaking by Ridley Scott, and just the writing and just the entire execution behind this film, is that you'd think it would get boring, you'd think it would get repetitive or tiring or dragging places, but it never does. It's constantly kind of engaging to watch, and I think that's what makes this film so great. And as I said, this is when they start to kind of try to track down and hunt the monster, and obviously it all goes tits up. And this is when we also get the first shot of the fully grown alien as well, which is actually an addition in the director's cut. When Harry Dean Stanton's Brett is kind of trying to find the cat, Jones, and then we just see this shot of the alien just hanging from above, and it's such a kind of quick, subtle moment that could so easily be missed. And even though I knew it was coming up, because I knew that was one of the additions in the director's cut, I almost missed it as well, because it is so subtle. There's not some big kind of moment in the score where it's like da, 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 da. There's not some like the camera doesn't zoom in on it, like it just cuts to this overhead shot of this shot looking up, and we just see the alien just hanging there, and it's such a quick, quiet, subtle moment, but it is just so incredible. And I love that is the first time we see the alien, and as I said, it's such a subtle moment that it can so easily be missed, but it's such a great shot, I think, and I'm really glad they added that in. And that being the first time we actually see the fully grown alien. And of course, Harry Dean Stanton as Brett is really great. one of his probably one of his most iconic roles as well. And this is obviously when we get the death of Brett and the first close-up reveal of the alien. And of course, I want to go back into the design of the alien, H.R. Giger there, and it's so great because it is just one alien, and the film is just called Alien. You think, oh, it's gonna be a bit unoriginal, but it's not. It's just the whole look and design of the alien is just so unique, and just the design there by Giger, everything just. Nothing feels like, I think there was a lot of inspiration from other films and other kind of works, but nothing feels like a copy or a rip-off of anything else. Everything feels so just unique and so creative and so inventive and so stylistic. You never once think of any other film when you're watching this. It never once feels like they're copying anything else or trying to imitate the look of anything else. And especially as far as the alien is concerned, because obviously we've had so many kind of just aliens in movies over the years, but I think the xenomorph in Alien is probably the most iconic out of all of them, because it's just got such a kind of unique, just striking look to it. It doesn't look like anything else. And again, practical effects, it's a guy in a suit. But even though there's so many kind of bad films in movie history where it's like a guy in a suit and it just looks so bad, it looks so fake, and you can just tell it's not a real monster, it's just a guy in a suit. In this film, if you didn't know, you wouldn't think it was a guy in a suit. Obviously you can tell it's practical effects, but you never once think when you're watching this film it's a guy in a suit. And perhaps it's because the alien is used sparingly, but I don't think it's just that. I think it's just because the design of the alien is so incredible, and the way in which it's used, it's just, every time you see the alien, you never once think that's a guy in a suit or that's not real. You think that's a real alien. It just looks so incredible. And as I mentioned, the sparse use of the alien in the film I think is incredible, because we don't actually see the alien that many times in the film. We see it in glimpses here and there. We never actually see it that much of the alien for kind of long periods of time. And maybe that could be annoying to some people, but I really love how they did that in this film, where they hold back. It's almost kind of like Jaws in a way, like what Jaws did with the shark, Alien does with the xenomorph, in that they hold back and they don't just show you so much of the alien, because if they did show you the alien all the time in kind of really kind of large kind of chunks, it would lose that kind of like the scariness to it, because obviously the design of the alien is incredible and it looks fantastic. But if you did see it for kind of long periods of time, frequently throughout the film, it would become less and less kind of exciting and less scary, because we would get used to it. But because they hold back on the alien and they don't show it all the time, and when they do show it, they just show it in just quick glimpses, it makes it even more scarier, it makes it even more kind of fresh and exciting. So every time it does turn up, it's just as scary and it's just as exciting, because we don't see it that many times. So every time it does pop up, it's always really effective and always really works. And as I mentioned earlier with the jump scares, there is a couple of jump scares with the alien that, even though I've seen the film before, it still makes me jump because of how effectively well used the alien is, and that they do hold it back. And when it does suddenly come back in there, it just really takes you by surprise, because you're like, when's it going to come back? When's it going to come back? And you just have no idea when they're going to bring it back. And when it does suddenly make another appearance, it's just so incredible. So I just love how the alien is used in this film. Again, quickly back onto the characters, I of course have to mention again how well written this film is. And I hate to keep comparing Alien to just all horror movies in general, because as I said, I'm not a big horror movie fan. I haven't seen that many horror movies, but I think what tends to bug me with a lot of horror movies is that they're kind of often very kind of lazily written, and they don't have kind of interesting characters. But what Alien does is that it's just so incredibly well written from a script standpoint, and the characters are all such strong, well written characters who are all really well realised, and the characters are constantly making strong and clear character choices. Obviously we get the scene where they're deciding what they need to do now. Are they going to continue hunting this alien? Are they going to try and change their tactics? What are they going to do? And you believe these characters, you buy into the choices they're making, and you never once doubt any of these people or any of their decisions, because it all feels so kind of real, and they're all written so incredibly well. And of course, as the characters are hunting down the alien, we get this incredible scene with Tom Skerritt as Dallas, who also is really incredible. He's really great in that role as the captain. This might be one of the best scenes in the film, maybe even the best scene. Again, another very suspenseful scene. It just keeps going and going and just ratcheting up the tension, and we just have no idea at what point the alien's going to come in. We know at a certain point the alien's going to come in here, but it just keeps going and going, and the tension is ratcheted up and up and up. It's an incredible scene, this whole air shaft scene where actually Ripley's the one who volunteers to go in there, but then Dallas is like, no, I'll do it. And of course we get the death of Dallas, which is very shocking and unexpected, and we get the kind of reveal of the alien again. And I think it's just credit to this film where, even though it's kind of doing the same thing over and over again, each time it happens it's different, and each time it happens it feels fresh and exciting and scary, and it's a real great jump scare, because it is a jump scare, you know, where we know something's coming, we know something's going to happen, but then when it does happen, it's so unexpected, it is so scary, even when you've seen it before already. And I think that's what makes it such a great jump scare, in that, because a lot of horror movies that I've seen where they have kind of the cliche jump scares, you just know when one's coming, and it's not scary because you know the exact moment when it's going to happen. You know, the music dies down, and then suddenly there's a loud burst of noise, and we get the jump scare. But with this, we genuinely have no idea at what point the alien is going to make an appearance. We have no idea when this jump scare is going to happen, and that's what makes it so much more effective and so much scarier. Is that when the alien does suddenly make its appearance, it like comes out of nowhere, and it really catches you off guard, and it is such a great kind of shocking and unexpected reveal there when we see the alien once again. And also, I have the effective subliminal use of the alien once again, because every time it shows up, it's scary and it's impactful, no matter how many times it happens. And it doesn't happen that many times, but as I said, because the alien's used sparingly, that every time it does reappear and every time it does make an appearance, it's scary and it makes an impact on us every time. And then, of course, is when we get the part of the film where it all starts to go, they all start to kind of lose their heads a bit. Dallas has died, they don't know what they're going to do now, there's only a few of them left. And of course, throughout the entire film, Ripley has maintained this kind of level-headed, straightforward thinking mindset. And what strikes me about this scene in particular, where kind of Veronica Cartwright's character is kind of just freaking out, is that with Ripley, she never once freaks out or has any kind of emotional outburst at all, despite all this crazy stuff that's happening. And I touched on this earlier, but what I like so much about Ripley is that she's a real strong female character, not necessarily because she's a physical badass, but because of her strong convictions and clear-cut character choices. Like, even in this moment of the film where everyone's freaking out and they don't know what to do or what's going on, she still maintains a cool, calm, level-headed attitude here, and she's like, no, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. And that's what I think is so great about her character, is, and what kind of sets her apart from all the other characters, that she never freaks out, she never has some big outburst. She's constantly maintains this cool, calm, collected demeanour, and I think that's what's so great about her character. And of course, as we get closer to the end of the film, we get another big reveal that is very kind of unexpected and shocking the first time round anyway, is that the reveal that Ash is an android. And like I said, it's shocking and unexpected, but it doesn't contradict anything that came before, and I think that's what's so incredible. I touched on this right at the very beginning, but it's not predictable. We don't see it coming in any way, but at the same time, it doesn't cheat either. The film doesn't cheat on kind of tricking you into thinking as a person, because, as I said, you go back and rewatch it, you can pick up on all these little hints and these little clues to the fact that he may not be human. But it's just so incredibly well done, because you'd think maybe in any other film they would cheat and try and trick you into thinking that he's a person, but this film doesn't do that. The clues are there, but they just don't reveal it to you. So when it does end up getting revealed to kind of the other characters and to us as an audience, it's shocking and unexpected, but at the same time we're not like, oh come on, because we look back and we're like, oh yeah, okay, maybe he wasn't human, maybe we just didn't realise, we were just convinced, oh, he must be human, but we're never once told that he's an android. But when it's revealed that he is, we're like, okay, maybe that actually makes sense now. And I think it's just such an incredibly well done reveal. It's shocking and unexpected, but as I said, it doesn't contradict anything that came before, so it doesn't cheat in any way. And of course, where the back and forth between Ripley and Ash comes to a head here, where kind of Ash tries to kill Ripley because obviously he's got these ulterior motives. He's been assigned by the computer to bring the alien back to Earth, which I think is another great reveal, and it also makes kind of his choice earlier on in the film make more sense now. Why would he bring him back on board? Because if anyone's going to make kind of a cold, emotionless choice, it would be the robot. But then we realise the reason he brought him on board was because he wanted to bring the alien back to Earth. He had the orders to bring the alien back to Earth, and it's a real great moment, because of course Ripley was the one who didn't want to bring him on board, and because Ash kind of overrided her orders, so to speak, all this death and destruction with the alien has ended up happening. So we can feel her anger and her frustration. And then this is when we get the kind of the death, so to speak, of Ash, when he's kind of, his head is kind of ripped apart from his body. And watching it again, actually, it was very reminiscent of the kind of the practical effects of the T-1000 in T2 Judgment Day. But then what I realised is that T2 was like 1991, this was 1977, but the practical effects are still so great. You buy the fact that he's an android and he's been kind of, his head's been disembodied, you know, it looks really real. Perhaps the only shot, and I alluded to this earlier, the only shot that kind of sucks you out of the film, it's not a big deal, it's a tiny little moment, is that when they reattach his head, or put his head back on the table, we cut from the kind of the practical kind of model to Ian Holm, and there's a moment there where you just know, when they have that cut, I think they should have cut away. They should have cut away and then cut back, and then we wouldn't have questioned it as much, and it wouldn't have sucked us out of the film as much. But because they cut straight from the model back to the actor without cutting away, it is a little jarring. So that's really, but to be fair, the fact that this film came out in 1979, like almost 40 years ago, and that one detail is the only thing that stands out that doesn't hold up, it's pretty extraordinary, actually. That's really, for me, the only moment in the film where, okay, perhaps they could have done that differently. That kind of does suck you out of the film a bit. You can tell in that tiny little moment there that it is going from a model back to the actor, but really that's the only kind of criticism I have as far as kind of something that's not aged too well, and it kind of doesn't hold up. But as I said, that's like the only thing in the film that doesn't kind of hold up, really. And again, I have to mention Ian Holm's performance as Ash, his final lines obviously being a particular kind of standout moment. Of course, this is when we get into the actual proper third act of the film, where everything kind of goes to shit, essentially. We get the death of Parker and Lambert at the hands of the alien, another death scene, and again, this is like straight out of a monster movie. And what I like is that each death scene, we get like numerous death scenes in this film. We get kind of Harry Dean Stanton's Brett is killed by the alien, or taken away by the alien. We get Dallas, his death scene at the hands of the alien, and then we get Parker and Lambert's death scene at the hands of the alien. And it doesn't feel repetitive, because each scene is different. They're all kind of scenes of kind of characters being killed or taken by the alien, but each one is different. Each one feels different. Each scene, something different happens to the characters. And this scene, it's like there is full-on kind of a death scene. It's literally straight out of a monster movie. And also, there's kind of, what struck me kind of on a multiple watch here, is that there's kind of like some sexual undertones here with the alien. And from what I've read up, those kind of were deliberate there from Dan O'Bannon, I believe it is, that is wrote the screenplay. Those kind of sexual undertones were actually deliberate, and kind of, it's like, was Lambert sexually assaulted by it? It certainly looked that way. And then obviously when it cuts away and we just hear her being kind of attacked by the alien, and she isn't just killed kind of straight away or taken like in an instant like Dallas or Brett. We kind of hear her reaction, and it's kind of like before she stops, and it's like, ugh, like what was the alien doing to it? It's like, that did not sound good. But yeah, and I think that's what makes it even more kind of uncomfortable and even more freaky and scary, is those kind of sexual undertones there. It's like, what is the alien doing? And was she kind of sexually assaulted by the alien? It certainly sounded that way, looked that way. But then we get to the finale of the film, and actually before we get to the kind of final moments with Ripley, we get this additional scene that reveals the fate of Dallas and Brett. And I actually like this moment. I don't know if it's like necessary, if it was compulsory that it had to be included. I think from what I've read, they cut it because they didn't want to lose that momentum going into the third act. But at the same time, I think it is a good scene that kind of adds some context there and helps to kind of to tie loose ends together to get to find out what happened to Brett or what happened to Dallas. I think it works either way, because obviously without the scene it's kind of more mysterious. We're like, oh, what the hell happened to them? But with the scene, it also adds more context. We find out what the alien did, what it was planning on doing to them. We see them in that nest, kind of alien organisms kind of around them, and I think it's a really cool moment there. And also, again, this is another chance for Ripley, who does again make another strong character choice. She does what needs to be done without letting her emotions get in the way. And this was the first time I'd seen this scene in the cinema. Obviously, the rest of the film I've already seen before, but this scene in particular was the only moment I hadn't seen before. I didn't know what was going to happen, and it did catch me off guard when Ripley just suddenly incinerated them. But I thought, at the same time, I was like, that makes sense, because it's in line with her character and the choices she's been making throughout the film. She's not letting her emotions get in the way. She does what needs to be done. She just can't take the risk of leaving them there. She has to kind of incinerate it. She has to kind of destroy everything. I think it was a real great moment, because a lot of other films probably wouldn't have done that. They would have had the character try to rescue them, but no, she's like, I can't take this risk, and she then has to kind of reluctantly kill them. And as we come to kind of the finale of the film here, obviously Ripley tries to kind of override the computer, because she set it to self-destruct, and then she realizes she's not got enough time. She tries to kind of override the self-destruct sequence, and then obviously we get some kind of great moments there between Ripley and the computer, where the computer's like, no, it's going to blow up the ship. And then we also get another great bitch line in this film, which I didn't realise, at first, because obviously the most iconic one is from Aliens. But there's also another great moment in this film as well that actually predates the iconic moment in the sequel. Much to her kind of frustrated anger, she just lets loose, "You bitch!" And it's a real great moment there. Again, I think a lot of people overlook that and talk about the moment in Aliens, which is the much more iconic moment, obviously, but there is actually another great kind of a bitch line in this film, which I didn't realise at first. And then we get this amazing finale here, where Ripley escapes in the pod, and we think it's all over, but then at the same time the film keeps going, and we're like, oh, okay, we get a sense that it's not over just yet, because we're expecting the film to kind of fade to black, we're expecting it to end, but it keeps going and going, and it becomes more unnerving. We're like, okay, something else is going to happen here. And even though we should be relieved that it's all over, we still feel kind of uneasy and nervous. And as the film carries on, we realise that there is still more to come, as we get kind of the fourth act, I think, in cinematic history. Maybe there was one that kind of predated this, but where we've had the final act, but at the same time there's then this additional fourth act, if you will, where there's another kind of big scene and action sequence at the end of the film. And I think that's what's really great. And what I've read up on with this film is that wasn't actually meant to happen, and Ridley Scott had that idea, and he asked for kind of extra money to kind of have a bigger budget so he could shoot that scene, and then they gave it to him because obviously they liked the idea so much. And I think it was a real great idea to take that on. Not that it needed it. If it ended there with her escaping, it still would have been a great film, but then the fact that they have that additional moment where then the alien is on that pod with her, and we have that kind of additional action sequence there, and that fourth act, the first fourth act probably in film history, I think is really great, because we're expecting it's over, and then we get even more. It just keeps going and going, just ratcheting it up and up and up. And this sequence in particular is just kind of a no holds barred sequence, just builds and builds as it goes on, leading to this intensely kind of dramatic conclusion there, where kind of Ripley finally is able to kill the alien. And it's such a great triumphant moment, because obviously the whole film she's been fighting and wrangling with this, and then she eventually finally manages to take out the alien, even though it's not easy, and it tries to cling on there, and then it's finally blasted out into deep space. And it's such a great moment to end the film on there. Ripley, the only survivor, escaping on that pod, she finally manages to take out the alien. And there we have it. That basically just wraps up Alien, the entire film there, from beginning to end, in my kind of deconstructive kind of analysis and discussion of the film. And as far as my final thoughts on the film are concerned, overall, I think it is a really great film. As I mentioned, it's not one of my personal favourite films of all time, but I can totally see why there are a load of people out there that love this film, and it is one of their personal favourites. And I do think it's a really great film as well. Like I said, I don't really have any kind of major criticisms with the film. There's a couple of shots, like with the moment with Ash there, where you can tell where it goes from kind of a practical effect back to the actor. It kind of sucks you out of a bit there, but overall, this is a film that is kind of almost 40 years old, but still holds up all these years later. And what is so incredible about Alien, linking it back to the beginning here, is that it is a science fiction, it is a horror, it is a suspense, it is a thriller. It's got all these genres that we're familiar with, and it deals with all these kind of conventional genre elements, but it explores these elements and executes them in such a unique way that makes it so different, and it helps to stand apart from the crowd. And what really kind of struck me actually watching Alien again in the cinema is that it's kind of like similar to Die Hard in a way, even though obviously Die Hard came like 10 years after this. And what I realised is that a lot of these big kind of genre movies, I think, were inspired and influenced by Alien, because you look at Die Hard and Alien, they're very different films, but they're also very similar in terms of the concept and the execution, in that they're both these contained thrillers that deal with this one person fighting off this kind of this threat here. Obviously in Die Hard, it's Bruce Willis in this isolated apartment block fighting the terrorists, and in Alien, it's Ripley in this isolated spaceship fighting the alien. So yeah, I didn't realise that at first, so I'm pretty sure like a lot of films that came after were very much influenced and inspired by Alien, because I don't think at the time everyone loved it, but over the years people have come to realise how genuinely kind of special and unique and revolutionary the film was. And it's probably my favourite Alien film. I haven't seen all of them, but the ones I haven't seen are kind of universally regarded as terrible, so I'm not planning on seeing them anytime soon, if ever. I've only really seen the first two. I may get around to seeing Alien 3 at some point. I've never actually got around to watching it, because I've just always heard so many just bad things from people that were just so annoyed with what they do in that film, so they kind of just like to pretend that doesn't exist. I may watch Alien 3 at some point. I don't plan on ever watching any of the others. Obviously I've seen Prometheus, so I'm enjoying these new movies here, but Alien probably is my favourite. I love Aliens, and the James Cameron film. I think it's hard to compare them, because Aliens is an incredible like 80s action movie, and obviously Alien is completely different. It's just kind of small scale contained suspense thriller, so it's really hard to compare them. And I do love Aliens for what it is, and I think it's really great and really entertaining, but I think I have to give praise to the original over the second one, because okay, maybe Aliens could be regarded as being the more entertaining and the more fun action-packed movie, and it is, but I think I might like the original more, because I just love it when genre films like in the sci-fi or action genre take a concept and deliver a very different spin on it. Like, this isn't just your stereotypical generic kind of sci-fi action movie, and what they did with Aliens was really great, and I think it was the best idea possible to do a sequel that was very different from the first movie, and they didn't just try to do the same thing as the first movie. They took it in a very different direction, and taking it in this big epic action movie direction was, I think, the best choice possible. But I love the original Alien because it was so different, because they told the story in a very different way, and it was kind of almost like a horror or a thriller that just happened to kind of feature these sci-fi elements. So yeah, that basically wraps up my thoughts on the classic original 1979 Alien. What do you guys think of the original Alien? Is it one of your favourite films? What do you think it does that makes it so great? Please let me know in the comments down below. And also, did you enjoy this some slightly different kind of video here, or more of a podcast type thing? I just like the idea of giving kind of a kind of in-depth kind of analytical kind of discussion on the film, if you will. And also, the second part in this series, in this kind of 3-part Ridley Scott series, will be on another key Ridley Scott Alien film, and that will be of Prometheus, the new movie, well, back from 2012, obviously. Starting with the original from 1979, I thought it would be good to jump to the next Ridley Scott Alien film, which of course was Prometheus, the first prequel to the original Alien. So that should be coming up in a week or so, probably. So yeah, that wraps up my thoughts on Alien. If you like this, then be sure to click subscribe to see more. But for now, I've been David O'Sullivan. I'll see you next time.